Bună dimineața, Europa! Bună dimineața, Europeni! Și bine ați venit la o nouă emisiune. Astăzi vom discuta despre viitorul relației dintre Uniunea Europeană și Regatul Unit, o relație care, după cum știți, este foarte complicată. De aceea, mai precis, am ales câteva subiecte, precum sistemul universitar și cum va fi el afectat, precum și alte posibile obstacole cauzate de Brexit. În această dimineață i-am alături de mine pe Vlad Zaha, care este student la Universitatea din Manchester, precum și pe Gary Paterson, care lucrează în Parlamentul Scoțian. Vom discuta mai întâi în limba română cu Vlad, iar apoi vom continua dialogul în limba engleză cu ambii invitați. Și îmi cer scuze anticipat pentru că nu vor exista subtitrări. Unul dintre motivele pentru care am dorit să deschid acest subiect este faptul că universitățile din Marea Britanie sunt în topul preferințelor pentru tinerii români. Adică aproape jumătate dintre tinerii români care aleg să studieze în străinătate aplică pentru studii la universități britanice. De ce se întâmplă acest lucru? Probabil pentru că oferta educațională este destul de mare, îți permite să studiezi aproape orice, iar taxele de studiu pot fi acoperite în întregime cu ajutorul unui împrumut guvernamental, acest cunoscut tuition fee loan, care reprezintă, de fapt, principalele motive, cred eu, pentru care mulți dintre tineri aleg această țară. Vlad, pentru că tu acum studiezi în Marea Britanie, din perspectiva ta, cum s-a schimbat viața studenților români în ultimii ani, dacă s-a schimbat în vreun fel, și cum crezi că se va schimba în următorii?
Bună dimineața și mulțumesc, Nida, pentru invitație. Eu, când am ajuns în Manchester în 2018, aveam chiar și atunci unele reticențe cu privire la studia în UK din cauza referendumului din 2016, dar pot să spun că nu s-au schimbat foarte multe în drepturile și în oportunitățile studenților europeni și români din Anglia și din restul Marii Britanii până acum. Deci, practic, aveam aceleași drepturi, aveam acces la împrumut, aveam acces la taxe reduse de școlarizare și așa mai departe. Din păcate, de anul următor, toate acestea se vor încheia. Pentru cei care sunt acum la universitate, rămân aceleași drepturi, vor primi în continuare împrumutul de 9.000 de lire pe an, pe care îl vor plăti foarte avantajos pentru ei, dar asta acum în septembrie 2020 o să fie ultima tură de studenți europeni care vor beneficia de taxele reduse și de împrumut. Din 2021, toți studenții europeni, inclusiv, bineînțeles, cei români, vor trebui să plătească în jur de 18.000 de lire pentru un an de facultate la licență, practic cu banii jos. Nu o să se mai ofere niciun împrumut și toți studenții europeni vor fi practic la același nivel cu cei internaționali, care oricum trebuiau să plătească în acest fel și înainte. Deci, statistic, deja au apărut foarte multe studii, decizia e destul de recentă, de o săptămână, cred, și deja 84% dintre studenții care ar fi considerați să studieze cel puțin în Anglia, au spus că nu o să mai ia în considerare, iar legat de români, anual ajung în Marea Britanie în jur de 3.000 de studenți români. Pentru anii următori, începând de anul următor, prognozele sunt la aproximativ 300, deci practic o reducere de 10 ori a numărului de studenți, pentru că un an de facultate va costa aproape cât un apartament într-un oraș din România.
Da, așa este. Deci tu vezi ca principală cauză efectiv această plată a acestui tuition fee, nu?
Da, asta probabil va fi unul dintre argumentele principale. Legat de călătoria în Marea Britanie, nu cred că ar fi un impediment. Dacă cineva dorește să continue să meargă în Marea Britanie, sunt sigur că va putea ajunge acolo poate cu viză sau poate fără viză, dar de studiat va putea studia dacă va îndeplini condițiile de ședere și de plata universității.
Da. Sperăm că nu vor fi schimbări în acest sens. Mă gândesc, vezi și vreun efect pozitiv al Brexitului pentru
Și mai trebuie doar să menționez că schimbările sunt pentru Anglia. Încă Scoția nu a luat decizia, dar Gary Paterson ne va spune mai multe despre asta. Deci, da, efect pozitiv. Eu personal nu văd niciun efect pozitiv al Brexitului în sine. În schimb, ce ar putea crea un efect pozitiv este ca studenții români sau românii în general să observe schimbările majore din Europa și situația globală și observând acele schimbări să ia decizii în favoarea României și în favoarea studenților, în sensul de a se implica mai mult în lumea în care trăiesc, pentru că Brexitul și tot ceea ce ține de Brexit a venit ca consecința unui vot și știm foarte bine că și în România studenții trebuie să se implice neapărat în vot și toți cetățenii români trebuie să meargă la vot. Deci, efect pozitiv al Brexitului nu văd, nici economic, social, practic toate punțile de comunicare cu restul Europei au fost cam tăiate, dar efect pozitiv poate ieși din ceea ce învățăm noi din Brexit.
Da, asta poate fi. Adică pentru celelalte state membre să învețe ceva din experiența prin care a trecut Marea Britanie.
Da.
Ok. Acum cred că putem continua dialogul în limba engleză, astfel încât să ni se poată alătura și Gary. So Gary, we're switching to English now.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So we were discussing higher education in the UK and how the number of Romanians and other European students will most likely be decreasing starting next year. So I know that for the moment, Scotland keeps free university tuition for EU students. But I think I've seen an article from the Telegraph saying that Alex Neil suggested that this should no longer be an option. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that, and how do you think it can change in the near future? What would be the risk if it would change?
Great. Well, thank you first of all for the invitation, and Bună Dimineața to your viewers. Good morning. Thank you very much for asking me to speak today. Well, the first thing I would say is Alex is a respected politician in the SNP. He's a veteran, respected beyond as well the party that supports independence. I personally have a lot of affinity for him, but on Brexit, he doesn't represent the majority of the Scottish people or of the party. He doesn't always make proposals which are necessarily the priority of the government, but what he, as an older retiring politician, kind of believes. But that's not to say that this won't happen. It's entirely plausible that the Scottish government could change its policy, and yet every year since Brexit has been the outcome of the referendum across the UK, the Scottish National Party and the Scottish Government has restated its intention to maintain the policy. It should be said that the Scottish Parliament does have limited abilities to raise its funds, and therefore it must operate on an evolving budget, which is based on a share of which is quite a lean neoliberal UK budget for England, while it's trying to operate as a modern social democratic welfare state. But Scotland also has significant issues with depopulation, for example, and a priority for the Scottish Government is inward migration and investment. The funding for EU students is 10% of the overall higher education support budget. That's not an insignificant amount of money, but in my mind it does a lot for return on investment. First of all, it provides Scotland with an inbound, highly skilled workforce, and citizens who bring great vibrance to our nation, our communities, and who form meaningful relationships with our citizens. Those that don't stay in Scotland, of course, in the long term, they leave with a great impression of our country, which they continue to foster in their careers and personal lives. And above all that, I think there's a message that we send to Europe that say that we're European, we're ready to join. We want to be open to Europe, and of course we want Europe to be open to us. So in short, there are no announced plans to remove the policy. Indeed, the opposite is true, that over the last 4 years, the government has maintained its preference to keep it. And I would say certainly for the 2020 to 21 session, it's been confirmed. So those students that are inbound this year will be covered. In terms of future years, certainly myself and others, I believe, will forcefully argue for the maintenance of that policy and free education in general. So that's to say, I don't believe that it would be a good decision if it was to happen. That's not to say that it definitely won't, but I believe that that proposal is very much against the national priority that we've set, and would be the wrong decision, particularly at this time in which we're looking for more of an open approach to our society, and we're wanting to bring in people to support our economy and gain solidarity as well in terms of our overall priorities.
That's reassuring to hear, Gary. But for sure, Brexit will affect, higher education in many different ways. So of course, we don't know yet if Scotland is going to keep free university tuition fees for EU students yet. But for sure, it will affect research as well. So until end of this year, I think all current EU agreements and rules will still apply to the UK, right? But in a way, losing access to the European higher education area or the European research area doesn't affect all higher education institutions in the same way. So I guess some universities are more exposed to Europe than others. There are those with high EU student numbers that may worry about the tuition fee income. And there are some elite institutions with high research intensity and traditionally high success rates for European Research Council funding. And they may worry more about these sources drying up. So I'm wondering, are you having this conversation in the Scottish Parliament, and what can universities do really to ameliorate their potential losses after Brexit?
Well, I can say for sure, I currently work in the Scottish Parliament, but I also have been a youth and student rep for some time. I worked in a university department related to student policies. I've been a youth leader, student leader in Scotland, and throughout this period, we've had the threat and subsequent process for Brexit. So it is an issue of major concern, and unfortunately it comes at absolutely the worst time for the education sector, which is battling a reduction at the moment in reduced fee income, obviously with the coronavirus. In terms of these programmes, Scotland is exploring whether it can maintain an agreement for participation in such schemes. But as you'll know, Scotland is not a sovereign state, and whether or not it would be possible to maintain membership for, say, example, the Erasmus programme would most likely be down to the UK government approving one of its territorial parts to join such an international programme, and it's unlikely that the EU would authorise us to do that unless we had the agreement of the UK. Of course, it would also be a question on how our contributions would be financed as well. I think we can expect some form of UK equivalent in terms of the research funding, in terms of the international mobility. I'm personally sceptical of what that will consist and whether it will have long-term sustainability following future electoral changes. As we've seen, the UK is a country that can quite vastly change its priorities from each 5-year block with the elections. Also coming from a more socially disadvantaged background, One of the things about programs such as Erasmus or much of the research programs is that they're fairly accessible. First of all, we have the benefit of European airlines and rail travel, which makes it feasible that you could travel to another European country quite affordably, but also you receive a grant from the EU directly to pay for your time abroad. It's really difficult to see how a UK alternative to Erasmus, which is focused mostly on the UK's global partners, as they describe it, would work in such a way. Either they would have to put a lot of money into the scheme, or it will become even more exclusive than it currently is. And I could envisage, rather than spending a year at Sciences Po in Paris, for example, your opportunity would be to go and study in Australia or in America. For example, the only time that I've been outside of continental Europe in my life was once I was involved in a university program and we went to China, and the cost of the flights was, something like £800. I simply couldn't afford that coming from my background, so I can't see how such a scheme is going to be accessible. In terms of that kind of accessibility of the geographies, the environment for UK higher education at the moment looks very perilous, and indeed will require major funding to beat back these two major threats, that is Brexit and the coronavirus. And in a way, it's a bit of a tragedy that as academia has been trying to warn about the risk of both of these threats, and it will be academia that has to pay for the government not listening to its threats. I think the worst downside of this all is that future warnings that we need to hear, such as the way that academia warned us about coronavirus, about unpreparedness for a pandemic, I should say, or warned us about the downsides of Brexit. If we reduce the capacity of our universities to do research and to inform society on how to progress, then we won't necessarily hear those warnings in future, and that will actually risk our future capacity in a far greater sense.
Thanks, Gary. For sure, we are facing more challenges now than ever. So, do you think there's a way, perhaps, to continue doing research in a way that also benefits, let's say, UK universities and European universities, like some kind of programs that could reassure that these research grants are being, exchanged without outside of the way it used to be done before?
If we were to look at an example, we would maybe want to look at the Swiss model. Again, I'm kind of talking broadly about all of education programs, so I'm talking about mobility as well as research. But if you look at the Swiss government, they are obviously not politically part of the EU. They are engaged in the single market, but they have some form of divergence as well, slightly, in terms of the fact that they're not. They've had some referendums that changes their policies and certain things, but more or less they're in the EEA, so it's not a direct comparison. But yeah, they have, for example, research and mobility programs, which are kind of associate status to Erasmus. Now, whether or not this new global Britain alternative to Erasmus and the other research programs would take such a similar form is yet to be seen. The problem with the UK approach is that they don't want to show their cards, and they don't want to tell people within their country or outside the country what they're actually intending to do. So we are sitting here just under 5 months away from the exit date, and of course we've got absolutely no clarity on what will happen with those kind of research projects. As it happens in terms of the research, I think when it comes to being a UK citizen trying to access research grants, I think there's been a sense of, well, what's the point, because you're not going to be part of us. And likewise, I think it's maybe been harder for people to get mobility to come to the UK to do research, because there's uncertainty basically in any form of business, whether or not that will be an academic or public sector or whatever. Every organisation must have a business plan, and if there's no clarity or certainty on what's going to happen, then you can't factor that into your planning. So in terms of the here and now, even though we're still accessing the funding, on paper, the actual in practice situation is much less what it was like before Brexit, and that probably gives us a bit of a flavour of what's coming next. So what it will come down to is the priorities of the UK government. They are reshaping the government institutions at the moment to better reflect their more of the kind of populist shape of the government in England, and they're retooling their departments and their civil servants to be more in tune with the Brexit priorities, which will come after the end of the transition period. And that means that all aspects of the government are going to be directed towards the trade deals that they're focused on. Those trade deals are not going to be necessarily with the EU, but they're focusing on Canada, Australia, the US, and other places. So in terms of their research, in terms of their student mobility, even things like the aid programme are being changed. They want more of a political basis of the aid programme. All these different strands of government are all going to be contributing towards the priority, which is the trade deals. So I'm not saying that there will not be cooperation. Of course, there's a lot of huge research that's going on in Europe that the UK probably would still want to be part of. Just off the top of my head, like something like CERN would spring to mind. But in terms of kind of ongoing basis, I think it would be on a case-by-case basis, and I think the UK will be at least trying to divert more of that capacity, which was focused on European research partnerships, into more of the China, America, etc.
Yeah, so for sure the programs will diversify. And I think all universities have some kind of programs or exchange programs, at least. I know I did with different universities abroad. So I think that will continue for sure. And now that you mentioned the Erasmus,
if you look at those programs, as I said earlier, the number of students that are going to go on an international exchange, such as Erasmus, are far higher than the students that are going to go on an international exchange to, say, spend a year in Colorado. Well, if you come from a working class background in the United Kingdom, you're already very lucky to have even made it to university. The idea of living in New York for a year is complete fantasy. So you need the funding to do that, and unless the UK government provides the funding, the Erasmus Living Grant is, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's not a huge amount of money, because the cost of living would be far cheaper anyway. Your cost of entry is cheaper. A flight to Charleroi in Brussels is sometimes going to cost you £50 or £60. A flight to New York could cost you £500 or even more. And of course, we have to always remember the situation we're in at the moment with coronavirus, that everything's amplified. And we've seen, for example, reports from the aviation industry that the cost of travel could increase by a third or even more. So in terms of the accessibility of those programs, they will be really problematic. If you're a student at Cambridge, then that's fine. But if you are at one of the universities that are out with the Russell Group or out with the elitist institutions, then it's going to be a problem. One of the great things about Erasmus and those research grants is that they were evenly spread across the nation. This elitist alternative is not going to have that same spread.
Yeah, I think one important aspect of the Erasmus program, and I think all kinds of programs in general, is the cultural exchange, which I think is sometimes being overlooked in the whole Brexit deal. So I know, Vlad, that you're also a student development and community engagement ambassador at your university. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the cultural challenges that students, both British and European alike, may face after Brexit? So will cooperation between British and EU students suffer in any way?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest threats is complete disconnection, because how it looks as of now. So we're looking at about 90% reduction in the intake of EU students in the UK, or at least in England as of now. But also the Erasmus program, and that's very interesting because the current Erasmus program is from 2014 to 2020. Now, I've been reading about that, and it will continue as long as there's money from the or budget money from the 2020. But after that, if it goes on, then it will be in a very, very limited form. So besides the 120K students that will not go to study in England, also about 40,000 UK students who may not have the possibility to go on an Erasmus in the future. And the cultural issues with that is almost complete disconnection, as I was saying. And we're talking here not only about academic achievements, but also from everything related to culture, say values, language, food, and I think in a few words, it would be exactly the European Union motto, like unity in diversity. So if it goes on in this phase, it will not be any unity in any diversity. It will be a complete cutoff, like building a wall. And I'm really sure that for students, this is not something they want to do. They want to explore the world. They want to exchange values, ideas. They want to travel, obviously, and to get to study in different environments and universities. And yeah, culture will suffer from every possible aspect. And obviously, it's not only EU students, it's UK students as well. Yeah, and I think it's gonna, hopefully, I always believe in change, even if they've just announced these measures. Maybe they will realize, or youth groups or university student unions or the National Union of Students will manage to pull something out. But if not, then there will be no more unity and diversity for students either. And students were the ones, and youth people, that really did not want Brexit, as shown in polls and their voting opinions. And it will be just similar to a tyranny of the majority. But as the former president of the European Council said, maybe sometime someone will have the courage to say what needs to be done if we can't reach a fair conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely, Vlad. I think there's many aspects here, and culture is always quite complex. And as you said, also British students will for sure see the effect of Brexit when they won't be able, or we don't know if they won't be able, but at least there will be some restrictions in the future. So it's not going to be just for the Europeans, but for sure for the British students. And I think some numbers I've seen, it was around 200,000 British students have gone through some exchange program, or at some point during their studies, they went to another university to attend courses or to do a different program, basically. So I think those numbers speak for themselves. It's a really important part of your study, basically, to do this cultural exchange, or whichever kind of exchange you signed up for. And I think we're going through a transition period right now, and it's official as well. I mean, since the beginning of this year, the UK and the EU have really entered this transition period until end of this year. And I think during this time, of course, the UK and the EU will attempt to agree to some kind of formal trade deal that covers all aspects of the future relationship between the two. But that really, means a very wide range of topics to cover. I mean, we were just talking about one so far. So, Gary, I'm wondering, from your perspective, what's the most important aspect to be clarified?
Had you asked me this question 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, I would have a far different answer. And it's with some degree of sorrow and regret that I say that, because frankly, now the answer is that we are not going to be involved in much from a European position, given the approach of the UK government in its current form. And I would say, in terms of the Brexit drama, it is kind of its final form, in that the previous administration, it needs to be remembered, was operating on a very small majority within the UK Parliament, and therefore they had to compromise. They couldn't push exactly what they wanted to push. This government that we have now has one of the strongest mandates that's been received. I should note that that's not throughout the whole of the UK, and certainly not within Scotland. But in terms of England, they've been returned with a very big majority. They've also won the battle, as it were, between moderates and the extremists within the Brexit camp. And therefore they have won the battle in terms of going for the hard Brexit. Incidentally, as I think we'll talk about maybe later, the hard Brexit approach that they're pursuing is the one that the government polling has been shown for some time will be the most damaging to the concept of a continued United Kingdom. So it really seems to be that the UK is withdrawn from anything and everything European, and even under the previous, some would say, moderate regime of Theresa May, to my opinion, it was still a hard form of Brexit that she was pursuing. They were removing themselves from treaties such as European University Institute, which is an opportunity for students in the UK to go and study a PhD at European affairs, removing from things like the Euratom Treaty, which is looking at nuclear safety. I mean, out of the lens of Brexit, these were not things that people were talking about during the 2016 referendum, and it seems to be that they've taken a blank check to run with it. I would say, as someone that campaigned for a Remain vote, I was genuinely astounded with the response, because I kind of assumed that if it was going to be a Leave vote, that it would be leave the EU political institutions but kind of stay within the single market, etc. And it should also be noted that what we now have is extremely far away from what the Leave campaign promised, in which they said that we would still have programs such as Erasmus, we would still have access to the single market, and that clearly is now not going to be the case. So in terms of getting clarity going forward, unfortunately there's not much clarity to be had if the government is saying that we're leaving most things. They are arguing for what they call a clean break with Europe. In truth, it will be far more opposite than clean, especially with regards to the abandoned half of the country in England, which voted Remain, and of course the other nations of the UK, which are not in favour of this programme that they're following. Sensible arrangements in relation to visa-free travel are already covered. The UK will continue to demand for the separation of freedom of movement and freedom of trade, but it already knows that it's not going to get that. And so all sides now, the EU, the UK, and observing governments across the world are preparing for no deal. It is the most likely outcome at this point. In practice, we might have a symbolic avoidance of no deal. So we'll have some form of wee deal, small deal that will cover some very basic principles. And then after that point, the UK and the EU future relationship negotiations will simply continue under a different name, as akin to the UK's, to the EU's trade deals with other countries, and probably will take years to conclude in full or in parts, and of which the UK will hope achievements elsewhere with deals that it hopes to secure with other countries will add pressure to the EU in terms of getting something closer to what it wants.
Yeah, for sure. I have the same feeling that it's not going to be over end of this year. Not everything will be, clear and settled. And I think when we look back in time, 4 years ago, when 52% of the British electorate voted to leave the EU, I think very few realized just what a complicated process it's going to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 47 years, right, of European integration for the UK. So everything from the British economy to its legal system is deeply linked to that of the EU. And I'm wondering, Vlad, in your opinion, what do you think will be the biggest challenge or the biggest challenges that UK will face in the coming years? And why?
So obviously, besides what I've been talking up until now about universities and the academic field, the overarching element will be trying to fit in within the international perspective, because almost in the dawn of time, the UK has been at the center of the world, leading in innovation and economy and social policies in the last few years. But now it has managed to set up the road to exclusion. So obviously now they have their talks with Australia and Canada and trying to set up trade deals. But now I think one of the very few times in history that they face themselves with having excluded themselves from the European Union, and also in a very, very unfavorable and adverse international political climate, and with the likes of recessions in the next years. I think the biggest challenge is, I don't think there's one single big challenges, but how they manage to integrate all the fields of operation within the current political situation worldwide. So if they manage to do that, then I think it will be decent. It will not be that terrible, but biggest challenges starting from how they manage their economy with the other states, and if they manage to get something out of the European Union deal. But also after many years after Brexit, we will have to see how the young people of the UK and the young people of Europe will get to cooperate and keep their ties and cultural exchange. But as of now, I see everything as one big challenge that's never happened before, and I honestly hope for the best. This is all I can say.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think, Gary? Do you see the same challenges as Vlad, or do you see some different ones, perhaps?
Sure. I think I want to talk on quite broad socioeconomic issues, which I think were a major factor in the UK's politics over that kind of last 47-year period of EU membership and going on into the future. But just to echo Vlad's comments as well, I think for me as a young Scot and a young European, I'm very keen to see that those ties of friendship and citizenship are maintained. Obviously, our perspective in Scotland might be quite different, because whereas the English pro-Remain camp are now talking about returning to the EU in the decades ahead, we're talking about trying to return in the years ahead, or even months if possible. So perhaps there's a different lens there. But I do think it's really important that we don't lose those connections and ties. And I don't think it's a mistake, actually, that the Remain voting bloc tends to be, people that are at university, for example. I don't think it's a mistake that the UK government is trying to wedge a barrier between European citizens in the UK and the rest of the EU. And I think trying to frustrate programs like Erasmus and the research funding is in part trying to add some form of distance for the next generation of voters, so that perhaps those cosmopolitan university students of the next decade perhaps wouldn't be as pro-European as the current batch of students that have benefited from a lot of the EU programmes. So I do believe that there's an element of politics behind it. But in terms of the broader picture that I just talked about, I think it's true that the predictions that we've heard on the post-Brexit model will actually come true, and that was the idea that the UK will move towards a kind of a Singapore model, which is a low-tax, low-wage economy, mixed with weak trade deals, with stronger powers, meaning that we will have to accept reduced standards and losing protected status of products such as whisky. The problem with Brexit, in part, was that it was voted by an angry country who felt that they were not being represented by the political class or supported by the economic mix in the UK. And that economic mix, for anybody that has been out with London in the UK, will recognise that it's mostly a service-based economy, such as retail, and what the UK calls is the North, and that's anything north of London and Birmingham. And that is indeed the majority of the country geographically and in terms of population. And these are, in the opposite, is London and Birmingham, which are cities that are focused exclusively on finance and trading on the UK's international emerging brands. So these regional inequalities that we've seen within the UK were in part the basis of decades-long dissatisfaction with the political system, which had then been channeled into the Brexit referendum. These will be amplified under the post-Brexit trade deals if they're going to take the form of low-wage, low-tax economy, which doesn't actually provide anything for those communities that were previously left behind within the UK. In terms of the rest of the of the dangers for the UK, I think it comes on the form of the current government, which holds a pretty uncomfortable majority, in my opinion, and they have half a decade of government ahead of them and could be re-elected still against that. So it's almost guaranteed that there will be a major shake-up of the internal function of the state itself within the UK. And one of those ways that might happen is a reform of the UK's parliamentary boundaries. The Tories already hold a very commanding position in British politics, not I should say in Scottish politics, but may seek to strengthen that further in this kind of culture war that they're currently engaged in within the reforms that they've been taking of the British establishment in terms of the government, and they look to extend those reforms to the media and legal systems and political system, as we've seen in countries such as Poland and Hungary. To my mind, much of the UK's failures are down to its distance from the public, such as the electoral system not providing results that the public feel connected to. And in Scotland, we regard that as a democratic deficit. I think that deepening of the democratic deficit, it will only serve to amplify such factors that contributed to the public anger, particularly in English politics. So in terms of the future, I think the UK really is on the wrong track, and I'm concerned for it, for people that don't have the opportunity that we have in Scotland to secure independence and to build a more equitable society.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the fact that, we're discussing all these challenges that UK may face, but it could happen that the UK will do very well, right? Somehow. And there is a risk that UK could become a non-EU alternative that starts to appeal to Eurosceptics in the remaining EU member states. I think there were a lot of voices when the referendum happened. And I think if UK and its citizens will be adjusting well after Brexit, maybe trust in the EU and its institutions could decrease. Vlad, what do you think? Could this encourage more member states to want out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been thinking about that and looking at the Eurobarometer, and it's very, very sensible to anything. So if the UK, I mean, it obviously depends what well means. If the economy skyrockets and the and everything goes up, then yeah, we could say it adjusts well or very well. And I think the trust of other member states in the EU and its institutions will decrease, but besides that, it will also fuel the voices of EU's skeptics, and obviously the foreign propaganda and the Russian influences in the EU. So yeah, it will just act as filling the voices. For example, the very famous bus. The red bus going up and down the UK saying how much money the NHS will benefit from the Brexit and how all the money we give to EU will go to our NHS. it will to an extent give some water to those voices, but obviously there's also what the EU does in that regard. So if it manages to reform itself, as now the new European Parliament is trying to do, then it might counteract. Obviously, we all wish well for the UK and their departure and after that, but if it can be proven that they do much better or better without the EU, then the EU will be in serious need of drastic reform before countries like Hungary or Poland push for its dismantle, or even Romania lately. Yeah. And whether this could encourage more states to want out, I think it might, but it's just my opinion, but I think it might, because as I was saying, the Eurobarometer is very sensible and the trust in the EU goes up and down. And now everybody will be watching the UK. So how's the pound going to go? How's their economy? What's going to happen with everything related to the UK? So it will be very interesting to look for that.
Yeah, for sure. And do you think, though, I mean, UK is in a unique position, let's say. So even if they do succeed in making everything, work perfectly in the next few years, that doesn't mean that if any other member state wants out, they will go through the same, success. What do you think about that? Do you think that's realistic?
That is correct, but as I was saying, it's all about the propaganda, because the UK Brexit campaign has been proven to be filled of a populist and propagandistic swamp with all sorts of fake or very close to fake promises. And I can say for certain that if they knew this would be the process, I think the vote would have been like 70% no. But yeah, then again, it's about how the voices asking for the dismantle of the EU or wanted the dismantling of the EU will use the situation where the UK is a major success of getting out the EU and actually managing almost, or at least without the EU. So if that happens, then yeah, I think those anti-EU voices will go up, and unless the European Union manages to do something, I think more countries will be made to think they should get out.
Yeah. I know, Gary, that you...
Can I just add a quick perspective to that point as well? So just one thing I think that needs to be borne in mind, first of all, and I've always said this to people who are in my situation, who are pro-independence or particularly pro-Remain, this point is mostly on that, it's to say that just because the UK is leaving the EU, of course it will involve a lot of upheaval for the economy. It will result in a lot of missed opportunities, and I believe it will reduce the economic opportunities as well. Those predictions should also be tempered. We shouldn't suggest that the UK all of a sudden is not going to be a functioning country or is not going to have a functioning economy. That's obviously not going to be the case. The UK is an advanced economy under any measure, and is a substantial country with a lot of built infrastructure. For example, London is a financial centre, a major financial centre of the world. That will continue. The UK will still be a destination. There's two things here, however. First of all is context, and anyone can paint a great picture if they only look at certain parts of the economy. Now, if you are only going to judge the success of the UK on London and ignore, for example, the deep social inequalities that exist in the post-industrial parts of the country, then you start to get an impression that the whole of the UK is actually the same as London, and that's absolutely not the case. Secondly, the UK will always be in orbit of the EU in some sense. The EU will remain a large partner in trading priority for the UK. And if the EU was to fragment into 27 different countries, if another member state leaves the EU, potentially they could benefit from that orbit status of being somewhat connected to the European Union through some sort of trade agreements, but being able to pursue a policy which is very rigorously against the EU. That might happen in one instance, and I echo what Vlad says, it might not be easy, but if all 27 member states tried to pursue that, then there would be nothing to be in orbit of. You would then be in orbit of China or America. In terms of the kind of overall direction of travel, I still think that the EU will have a lot to promote itself on and to say, to demonstrate its worth. And actually now with the UK out of the EU, I think there's a lot of internal developments for the EU that will now be able to proceed that may not have been able to proceed previously due to the UK veto. So I think in terms of analysing whether or not the UK has achieved a lot, I think you need to put the context of what does it get benefit from in terms of being on the orbit of the EU, and then what is the full story within the UK in terms of its socio-economic development, in terms of the wider geographical development.
Yeah. So Gary, I know that you campaigned, right, against the UK's withdrawal from the EU, and I know that you are promoting the right of Scotland to remain in the EU. Actually thinking about it, Brexit was backed by only 38% of Scottish voters, which seems to have also made the EU slightly more sympathetic to the idea of Scottish independence. I think it's something you were mentioning earlier. So I have a big question for you, actually. Is Scotland likely to reunite with the EU, you think?
I genuinely believe that it will. As of July 2020, where we are now, support for Scottish independence sits at 55%. Depending on the poll that you look at, we had one that just came out in recent days, which was 54%. But consistently over the last 3 or 4 months, it's been in the majority. We believe that's going to continue. I want to give maybe a flavour of where I see the UK challenges are as well, and that Welsh independence is firmly opposed by 54% of the population. 24% are firmly in favour of independence, and that leaves a huge gap in terms of people that are to be deciding on what they want. Irish reunification is again sitting roughly on 50-50. And surprisingly of all for me is that in the last couple of days, one of our major polling agencies, YouGov, had a poll in England in which they asked the English their opinion on English independence, and it's sitting at 35% in favour, and actually 49% of the governing Conservative Party's voters are in favour. So in my opinion, the UK would have to do something very remarkable to turn this around. Even prior to the Brexit vote, the yes vote in Scotland remained pretty solid. We had a 45% in favour of independence in 2014, and we didn't really lose anything from that in the following years. And it's only been 6 years, but it does feel like a lifetime, I have to say. And a lot of our polling experts have actually said that in terms of the demography, all age groups under 55 were in favour, therefore meaning that potentially we might have only had to have waited for a set amount of time until naturally the new voters come into the system, who would then be not necessarily, because we don't take it for granted, but we're more likely to be in favour of independence. And given that the retention of our older voters for yes has remained, that would mean that we would have probably naturally moved into a pro-independence majority anyway. But as it happens, we are here where we are now, and I don't believe that had Brexit happened that we would be discussing independence so soon. But Brexit is obviously accelerated plans. It should be remarked upon as well, though, that if we do achieve independence, there will be a large minority which, just like before with the failure to achieve independence, there'll be a large minority who still believe in their position. And in terms of the unionist vote, as we call it in Scotland, those that want to seek the continuation of the United Kingdom, there's complete dismay at the state of the union. and the campaign against independence has become very disquiet. There's not a lot of confidence in terms of the UK government approach, and there's in contrast, there's an increasing sense of confidence in Scotland. The government is recording a high level of satisfaction. People generally are feeling more confident that Scotland has what it takes to operate as an independent country. So through awareness of all that, we do have to recognise that we still have significant challenges to address, as all states do, and there isn't a country in the world that doesn't have some form of challenge on the programme for government. And I think the point in terms of independence is that we've been kind of fighting the debate over the last decade on the basis of that, well, everything won't be perfect after a yes vote, and that, of course, that's not the case for any country. You know, in Romania that you have your own challenges, but I think that the point is that, which is maybe changing a little bit now as a result of the coronavirus, is that we do recognise that we have structural challenges, but we're seeing that where we have the ability to implement our own response, that we're actually getting better gains than we otherwise would have had. So personally, I believe that Scotland will pursue a referendum in the coming parliamentary term. If the elections in May 2021 result in the majority that we're seeing in the polls, then it would be very difficult, I think, for the UK to still function as a democracy on face while turning down the ability for the country to determine its future. And I hope that we would get a yes vote in that referendum, and I would like it to be higher, because I want the whole country to feel that they're on a journey together. And of course, there will always be some that don't want independence, but I do believe that there are many. I've got many friends within the side that are against independence that have said to me privately, at least, that if that was the will of the country, they would still be Scottish, and they still believe in their country, of course, and they would hopefully engage and be part of that journey. So when we've looked at the 2014 referendum, there was a documentary that came out some years ago in which the campaign against independence themselves released their own internal polling, and they showed that in terms of the sense of Britishness, the idea of believing that you're UK minded and that you have a UK identity, that the number of people in Scotland that felt that were actually very low, and that a majority of people actually believed that if Scotland could be independent, if we had the economic capability to do it, if we had the political ability to do it, a vast majority of the country actually would vote for independence. So what they had decided in that referendum was that they said, well, we can't make an emotive argument for the UK because actually the people don't see themselves as British. We have to find an argument to say that it would be a disaster for Scotland economically. It would be a problem for us in terms of the political stability that the UK had theoretically offered. And of course now, from 2016 onwards, the UK's economy has been under high pressure as a result of Brexit, and its so-called political stability has been an issue as well. So therefore, the two major arguments against independence, they're no longer a status quo on the no side. One of the effective arguments that they used in 2014 was to say, if you don't know, vote no. And now, one of the things that I'm saying is that there is no longer a vote for a status quo. Voting no doesn't mean status quo. And if you're voting against independence, you're still voting for some form of change. And I think that's going to be the difference on an upcoming referendum, rather than the previous referendum, which was framed as change versus status quo. There is no such thing as a UK status quo anymore. And the UK that we're debating about now is vastly, and I would argue inferiorly, different than what we had before. So there's no doubt that Scotland wants to return to the EU, and I believe that if we do, we will take our seat alongside other small European nations to act as a progressive force in Europe and, of course, in global affairs.
Yeah. But I think one thing we weren't discussing was the fact that once Britain left the EU, also made it practically more difficult for Scotland to be independent, because an independent Scotland would now border a non-EU country, which is likely requiring more infrastructure, border checks between regions whose communities are deeply intertwined, which is similar to the problem of the Irish border, which really complicated Brexit talks. I'm wondering, Vlad, what do you think? So, from this perspective, is Scotland likely to reunite with the EU?
I've been following the referendums, and I actually made some sort of small presentation on the likelihood of it happening, but it was just basic information. So I don't know if it's likely to reunite with the EU, but I for sure know that as a student, I would love for it to reunite with the EU, because it has one of the best universities out there in Europe. And as of now, for me directly, it seems that besides dragging Scotland outside of the EU, it's also dragging Scottish universities outside of the reach, or trying to drag Scottish universities outside of the reach of European students. So other than that, I completely see Gary's point, and I adhere to it. So the argument, I really admire the arguments, they're very good arguments. So whether it's likely, I hope so.
Just on the point of the border, I think it's important to just address that. So first of all, let's be clear that I'm not in favour of having like a border between Scotland and England, but we are going through a bit of a national discussion just now as a result of coronavirus, whereas before the border was a kind of a bit of a problematic question. Now it seems to be one which is based on more of a practical sense. In terms of if we were in the situation of Northern Ireland, I would agree that it would be a far more difficult situation to manage, perhaps even impossible to manage 256 border crossing points. Though I think that anyone that's interested in this can simply go onto Google Maps and have a quick look at the border between Scotland and England. What we see is a vastly different situation. When we actually break down the Scottish border across the whole of the coastal border and the land border, it's surprisingly small. We have 4 airports, we have 2 train lines, we have 3 major motorways that connect from England to Scotland, and we have several small roads. We don't have any international shipping ports for commercial passengers, other than the port which does a ferry from near Glasgow to the Irish to Belfast. Obviously we have connections from Shetland, etc. But in terms of the Scottish mainland, the border, if we were to have to do checks just now in terms of the context of coronavirus, it would be surprisingly simple in terms of the logistics of the entry points and exit points. Now, second to that, in terms of Ireland and the UK, we have something called the Common Travel Area, and that has been maintained despite Brexit, meaning that citizens can freely move in the same way of freedom of movement within the British Isles. So we would expect that to continue. That then comes down to the final point of customs, basically. And in terms of customs, you would be able to operate on many different bases, but one basis might be to flag through cars, quite simply a quick check if, or you could have randomized checks, or simply cars just pass through. If you have lorries, they simply load up and go through some sort of custom check. In terms of infrastructure as well, if border infrastructure needed to be in place, I don't believe it would be fences, and many countries don't have a fence. The United States is the most famous example of Mr. Trump with his wall. He's talked about the fact that there are no fences or walls between Canada, the United States and Mexico. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to see an emergence of Hadrian's Wall. But one final point to make is that the land that surrounds the border, not to mention the fact that there are small towns and there are people in the borders, Scottish and English borders, who do require that free movement, which I believe would continue. But just to make the point that there are national parks which span the border, and on both countries for the United Kingdom, in both of the UK countries, Scotland and England, the land around the border is some of the least populated land within those countries. So I personally don't believe that the question of the border is as difficult as it could be made out to be, and certainly is in other parts of the UK.
I think we could talk about this this topic, for hours and hours. But I think we're getting close to the end. So I hope we can continue this discussion some other time. Actually,
I'm always happy to come back.
Thank you both for taking the time to join me on this show. I'm frankly looking forward to visit UK again. It's been a while. Maybe next year, after all this craziness is over. Mulțumesc tuturor celor ce ne-au ascultat la Cafea de Dimineață și vă invit să urmăriți pagina Tineri Europeni pentru a nu pierde nicio emisiune Bună Dimineața Europa sau Liber despre Europa. Ne găsiți de asemenea pe YouTube, pe pagina cu același nume, dar și în format audio pe Spotify și Anchor. Și veți găsi linkurile în descrierea acestui post. Pe data viitoare!